Welcome back. I'm Austin Westfall. Take a look at some of these images. We had live images of this happening earlier on in the evening. We don't have the feed anymore, but this was the military parade in Beijing as it was in action. China's President Xi Jinping convening his Russian and North Korean counterparts in Beijing for the first time on Tuesday. This was a show of solidarity with a number of countries that have been shunned by the West over their role in Europe's worst war in 80 years. Reuters says that Xi hosted Vladimir Putin for talks at his personal residence, calling him an old friend. And then a few hours later, he met with Kim Jong Un as Kim Jong Un's armored train was spotted arriving in the Chinese capital. Xi, Putin, and Kim were set to take center stage at this massive military parade earlier today. We saw images of not only Xi, but we saw Putin watching, Kim Jong Un watching as well. Shortly after these images came in, we saw this post from President Trump. It reads as such: "The big question to be answered is whether or not President Xi of China will mention the massive amount of support and blood that the United States of America gave to China in order to help it secure its freedom from a very unfriendly foreign invader. Many Americans died in China's quest for victory and glory. I hope that they are rightfully honored and remembered for their bravery and sacrifice. May President Xi and the wonderful people of China have a great and lasting day of celebration. Give my warmest regards to Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong Un as you conspire against the United States of America." That's how it ends. National security analyst, retired Marine intelligence officer, and host of the Strat podcast, Hal Kempfer, is here. As you conspire against the United States of America, Hal, your reaction to the POTUS's words?
That is dripping with sarcasm the whole way through. and first off, that has been an issue. As they've been, if you were at the parade, you wouldn't know that the United States played a role in defeating Japan during World War II. You'd think that somehow the Chinese Communist Party did. Quick reality check: the Chinese Communist Party really didn't do that much to defeat Imperial Japan and China. It was the U.S. and what we did across Pacific. The resistance to Japan and China was, basically supported by the United States, and we flew in stuff over the Himalayas and all sorts of stuff. So we played a decisive role, and China deliberately this year kept that hidden and such. Now, I think that last part was he personally, knows Kim Jong Un. Obviously, just met with Putin, has pretty warm personal relations with them. But that little hook on the end, as they conspire against the United States of America, I think that's just basically what the U.S. and certainly what POTUS thinks about what's going on over there. He acknowledges it's happening, but he's also very clear about what they're doing.
So we were watching, Hal, as this military parade was taking place. It's no secret that these countries are tight, correct? I mean, does this show of unity by China, the Russians, the North Koreans, does this tell us anything we don't already know?
A lot of what we're seeing there is very performative. Okay, they're all there, they're meeting and stuff. I didn't see or hear really much, except a little bit on a natural gas pipeline that may move forward. And I thought it was going to move forward anyway. But other than that, I didn't really see much other than the same rhetoric we've always heard. And we heard that, from Putin and Xi, before the war in Ukraine, throughout the war in Ukraine. It's been the same sort of thing. So I felt that was pretty much the same. The only difference is that Russia right now, from an economic standpoint, and probably from a political standpoint too, is getting darn close to being a vassal state of China. Russia is not a big country. It's got an economy about the size of Italy. And then you have China, which just dwarfs Russia in every single category. And in the Far East, they've been doing this soft invasion across the border that's so big that, there are many who think that at some point China may just decide to, absorb the territories they lost back in the 19th century to imperialist czarist Russia. So I just I looked at that and I didn't see anything change really different. Kim Jong Un being there was interesting. I thought it was interesting. He was in China. There have been some rough edges with Kim Jong Un's relationship with China at times. And the fact that he was there, he was viewing the parade. And of course, the backdrop is that he's sending arms and military personnel to Russia to fight in that war. I thought was interesting. Doesn't really change anything. Of course, it also talks about the paranoia that he had to take that armored train on that really long trip going up to China. And that's something that he has flown. He flew to that Singapore summit, but he doesn't fly very much. In my recollection of the Singapore summit, he actually had to borrow a plane from China in order to fly that summit safely and back. So, he still does this armored train. His father did the armored train thing. I think his grandfather was doing the armored train thing first. And that's because they're so afraid when they travel that's where they're vulnerable and that's where they could be attacked.
Not many people realize this, Hal, but North Korea shares, might be a small piece of border, but it does share a piece of border with Russia and with China both. We were looking at these images. You can see Xi, Putin, Kim Jong Un, a number of other world leaders. This was them as they walked into the military parade. I need to ask you about this, though. This is Xi. You only see it for a moment before it goes back. There it is. Okay, so this is him. Do I have this right? Is this him giving a press conference in a moving car? Am I looking at this correctly?
Looks like he is. I don't know how well I'm assuming they had the audio figured out so people could actually hear what he was saying. But it looks like he was talking to the folks that he was passing as he was going by. And I will say, one thing I've been seeing numerous reports on is the amount of preparation that went in this parade. I mean, they really went all out to make this quite the spectacle. So I would imagine the audio portion of this was worked out and rehearsed a gazillion times. They rehearsed everything to the nth degree. They put out a lot of missiles. They displayed what looks like some of their most advanced hypersonic anti-ship missiles as well. They did a lot of things, but the amount of preparation, performance, rehearsals, all the things that went in this parade was something truly spectacular in terms of what they did there. And by the way, all the buildings you see behind, every window you see, every balcony, everything else, that has all been secured. Every one of those buildings along that parade route up to the roof have been completely secured. So you're looking at China, this, ruled by the Communist Party, this autocratic system, and yet they're having to go these tremendous security arrangements out of what can only be described as fear that something could happen. And it's really interesting to see what they did, not just the spectacle itself, but what they did behind the scenes to make sure that there wasn't, an attack or an assassination attempt or something on Xi or one of the other leaders.
You mentioned earlier the gas pipeline. Let me give the viewer some context on that. China and Russia have advanced an agreement to build a gas pipeline that would tie their economies even closer. Hal, do deals like that give the U.S. less leverage as the U.S. considers more sanctions on Russia?
Well, if the U.S. imposes those secondary tariffs on which it sounds like President Trump is leading that direction. There was word out today. Secretary Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, made it sound like he was going to make a decision on this week. And if they do that on oil, they could, easily we could go to the next step and do it on gas. But that is very important for Russia because the European countries, which still import liquefied natural gas from Russia, I know that sounds crazy after all these years with the war in Ukraine, but they're still dependent on that Russian gas. They're all working very hard to reduce their consumption of Russian natural gas. And so China may become one of the few outlets. However, if we treat natural gas the same way we treat oil in a secondary tariff regime, that could be a real vulnerability for China, but it could also be a potential death spell for the economy of Russia.
One last thing I'll bring up to you about Russia, China, North Korea. Let's bring another country into the mix here. India. Putin and Xi also met with Indian Prime Minister Modi yesterday. This is the first time, Hal, that I've had a chance to speak with you since these photos came out. Modi was posting all of these on his social media account yesterday. What does Modi's deepening cooperation with China and Russia mean for America, Hal. Obviously, we've watched as Modi and Trump have seen a bit of a strained relationship over Modi pretty much saying that he's going to continue buying that Russian oil. So I guess my question here is, the most populated country on the planet, India, what does Modi's deepening cooperation with China and Russia mean for the White House?
I actually saw Modi's presence there and everything he did, again, as performative. He had to show his supporters back home that he wasn't going to buckle to the pressure of the U.S. and President Trump. He wanted to kind of strike out on his own. So having these, displays, these, photographs, or these images of him standing with Putin, standing with Xi, standing with others, and tight circle, all talking, smiling, everything else, that really works for him. The issue, though, is India's and China's economies, they don't sync very well together. In fact, they compete for some of the same stuff on the global stage. And a lot of manufacturing that was in China has actually moved over to India. So they don't sync up well. India right now is being hit with that 50% tariff by the U.S. China could be hit by something like that very soon. But what's really interesting is, they've had this ongoing battle. I mean, there's China claims Indian terrain, and they've got this ongoing Cold War that gets hot on occasion in the Himalayas. And that's been fierce for a very long time. So Modi did not want to be there when that military parade was happening. And of course, China and Japan are crossing swords in the West Pacific, and have some, they have the same claims on the same territory, stuff like that. So it was interesting. Modi took off before the parade and went immediately over to Japan to meet with the Japanese and be seen over there. And I'm sure it'll be the same sort of thing, a lot of smiles, a lot of handshakes, things like that. And it was very interesting to see that kind of juxtaposed. He's in a very difficult position. India economically has to align with the West. They gain nothing by aligning with China. They really don't get a whole lot except for cheap oil from Russia, and then they get arms from Russia. But even then, they're not thrilled with that. And then, of course, Modi's also looking at the fact that China was backing Pakistan, sending them those weapons, sending them some of that advanced anti-aircraft air defense capability, and those fighter aircraft that shot down Indian aircraft in their little war that just happened in June. So there's a lot of rough patches between China and India, and he's trying to balance all this, but he's actually in a very difficult position right now.
It's a little bit of a rough patch between India and China. What kind of a patch would you describe the India-North Korea relationship while we're talking about all these countries?
Not quite as rough. I will tell you what I do recall is when they were doing when Kim Jong Un was doing underground nuclear testing. His underground nuclear testing site, which was in a large mountain underground, obviously, collapsed. And there were reports of radiation leaking into China. China was not thrilled about that at all. And China has always been nervous that the Hermit Kingdom might do something really stupid that could end up causing great harm to China, or radiating parts of China, things like that. So they've had some difficult back and forth. They've also had a lot of North Koreans basically try to escape, or I should say escape North Korea through China. That's one of the big valves, because the northern border isn't secured as much as the DMZ. So they head north. So there's been a lot of difficult, let's just say, friction between the two countries over the years. And it seems, I think right now, if you look at the surface of it, it's a lot of smiles, a lot of handshakes and things like that. But they still got a lot of issues to work out. And, China, they're wary. They're wary of the Russia, North Korea connection, what's going on there. I don't know if they feel they have as much control as they'd like to have with what's going on there. So I'm sure there was a lot to discuss, and there was, many layers of communication below what you saw on the surface.